Hello and welcome to another episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. And today I'm absolutely delighted to bring on a company which I've been talking about, or feels like I've been talking about for a long, long time. I've heard a lot about this business and I've wanted to find out a little bit more. And it's an absolute pleasure to bring in their VP of Product. Jakub, it's wonderful to have you on the show. Bud is a business which I think has gone from strength to strength over the years. We're hearing more and more about it as it sort of continues to gather pace. Product, as people who've been watching this show, is an area that I'm fascinated about. So we'll come into a little bit of background about the whole concept of product management and the difference in B2B and B2C. And I'm also delighted to be going into another subject, which I feel like I've been getting more and more knowledgeable about over the years. And this has been one of my great sort of guilty pleasures, is finding and learning out from the very best of the best. But the whole AI revolution, there's so many different strings to it. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how you're using AI, what you think of it, and where it can move further forward. So loads and loads to get into. But before we start with it all, I always like an introduction. Tell me a little bit about your background, which as I said before, I've done a bit of research on, and I love the sort of story of where you've come from and where it heads, and some of the businesses and experiences and roles that you've had so far. And also the sort of the beast that is Bud. Tell us a little bit about the company as well. So it is over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Let me start with telling you a little more about Bud. So Bud is a transactional data intelligence platform for the banking and financial services industry. And what we do is we enable global companies to make financial decisions simpler by turning transactional data into rich customer insights. And our journey started with helping individual customers understand their finances better. Open banking was and still is a big part of what it is that we do. But we're also providing both scenarios that are applicable across all customers of major financial institutions, like, for example, helping them get better user experience in the mobile app, but also doing things around affordability and credit decisioning. So some of the more technical aspects of what is happening within the bank or within the financial institution. What we have been doing from very early days was applying AI. So we have been one of the trailblazers when it comes to building large language models, having them in-house, training them, and then thinking of how different techniques can be applied for us to make more sense out of the data that we're getting, whether it's structured or unstructured, but also then how that can create a great interaction with the end customer. That end customer, in our case, might be a customer of the bank, but it also might be employee of the financial institution that is given some data and needs to accomplish certain tasks. So we are very much B2B/B2B2C business, and that is something that will continue into the future.
Fantastic. We'll dive into that again in a little bit, and tell us a little bit about your background. So there at the moment as VP of Product in a business, as we say, that is sort of completely, and I think it always has been. Why I mentioned at the start about Bud is I've known people who've worked there. I've had friends who've worked in Bud, and I hear these stories about sort of innovation, and I know that you guys have sort of continue to evolve and change, and the growth story's been pretty fantastic and well documented, etc. But tell us a bit about your journey to that and what you do at the moment.
Yeah. So at the moment I'm VP of Product at Bud, which means that I'm overseeing everything product related, starting from product strategy, understanding how we fit into the market, but also what is our long-term vision and what is the North Star and how we want to get there. Down to making it work on operational level, ensuring that we are able to make right decisions when it comes to prioritization, and also being able to support my colleagues across the whole company. The great thing about Bud is it's still very much startup-like, which means that it's a flat structure. It's people being very able and also allowed to try and find best solutions on themselves. So there is this sense of being able to move forward very, very quickly. And also there is sense of mission, there is sense of being genuinely able to contribute to the well-being of the customers at the end of the journeys that we are supporting. So that's what I'm focusing on right now. I have so before joining that, I had my take on trying to create a company that would be still within financial services industry, that would take generative AI and create experience around specific journeys for insurers. This didn't really work out, and there are some good lessons learned from that. And before that, I have spent many years sort of competing with that, working for an Icelandic finance management software provider called Meniga, that has, in many ways, it's a company that can be seen as 5 years. It is 5 years older than that, and it also what it really is in terms of approach to clients, approach to technology. But at the time, it was the market leader. It's still one of the leading companies when it comes to the specific niche when it operates. At Meniga, I've joined to manage professional services, to manage
Mm-hmm.
how that company works with its enterprise clients, which is something that I had a very good view because I came well from the other side, but I'm going to get to that in a second. But my role meant that I was heavily involved with almost every new client because integration is a very big topic for enterprise
Absolutely.
clients.
Yeah.
And as I have been involved in that, I started to look into how we can make the commercial side of this better. And it happens to be that at the time, the company was going through the period of transition to the first non-founder-led sales team, which wasn't necessarily perfect fit for the size, the scale of the organization at the time. So I have been asked to step in as a kind of interim head of sales, which started to work pretty well. I spent 4 years as a chief revenue officer,
Mm-hmm.
but in reality, I was the product guy, as in I was the face of the product and the guy that understood what it is that we do, how to best use it, and how to find the right fit with each client. And I was surrounded with great sales guys. So my role was really being the sort of mix of pre-sales slash the face of the product rather than a boiler room type of sales guy.
I mean, this is a whole episode on its own, right? Because I think there's a really fascinating switch to look. I started in the industry 24 years ago and started seeing a very different salesperson in financial technology markets than the ones which you see today. And I think that's been a sort of nature of the evolution of technology and people needing that sort of fundamental skills to be, seller beware as much as buyer beware, where you need that much more credibility with a much more informed buyer base on the sort of products you're talking to at B2B level. So I think it's a really fascinating sort of play that you've got. The way you were describing yourself there as a sort of almost a reluctant CRO, but a CRO who sat there as being very product focused, surrounded by the good sales guys, and being able to really sort of utilize it from a I guess a customer standpoint and see these issues from through the eyes of the customer, which I think is a fantastic actual way of going out and delivering it. And I said to you off air beforehand that I've seen more and more founders coming from product backgrounds because it's that mix of tech understanding, customer experience, and being customer led, but also then being able to translate with the tech teams and build that longer term strategy. And so when you talk there about having a startup and taking lessons from that, I think it probably even increases your value to to a business about being able to steer that and being able to walk the talk a little bit more, particularly when you put into it the years you did at Accenture beforehand, working in a consultancy and picking up all of that. So when I talked beforehand about the sort of background and skills that you bring for it, I think it's a really exciting I think it's a really exciting profile for a VP of product to be sat in there and to be able to be looking at things as interesting as AI at the moment, particularly when you talk about your experiences within your business. And AI, look, very much the sort of the darling of conversation over the last sort of 18 months or so ago. And we see various hype curves in various different areas. We saw blockchain go through for the last 5-10 years of conversation and hype at various different phases. ChatGPT, obviously, November 22, suddenly built this huge surge of interest into December, whenever it was, built this huge surge of interest into it. And everyone, suddenly said, right, we're weaving AI into our strategy. Yet, I think it's been one of those things there where actually the use cases of how it actually is utilized and where it becomes genuinely beneficial and what is actually genuinely AI in a product is a really interesting piece for it. So I know you want to talk a little bit about developments in the AI space and how you actually turn it into a valuable and viable product that people can use to it, rather than sort of ticking a switch saying we've got an AI thing to impress an investor. This is about sort of saying, right, how can we use AI to genuinely transform the buying experience and the product experience of where people are going? So I know I haven't necessarily put a question in you there, but let's discuss that as a topic. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts about the sort of developments in AI and specifically with regards to that product world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the starting point is there are so many questions that it's very difficult to find the right one to start with. From our perspective and what it is that we are trying to achieve at BAD, a lot of our focus was on making sure that the data that financial institutions have access to is being used in a way that leads to the best possible outcomes. And we are using AI for that. But now we are also looking more and more into how you can be a little more forward thinking around how financial institutions will be operating in few years' time, and thinking of what it is that they're really doing. And a lot of that is just having workflows and having different parts of the organization, different silos, passing task one to the other. And that is something which, with enough scale, creates inefficiency and it generates costs. And it's probably most acute when it comes to looking at the question of data, because of course we're talking about customer transactions, we're talking about things that first of all have lots of restrictions in terms of access, second of all are very often distributed across multiple systems, because if for any reason, like if you look at any financial institution, the number of systems dealing with accounts, transactions, payments is mind-boggling. The bigger the organization, the more complex that setup is. It happened for a reason, and it's very often unavoidable. But the outcome is that they have, in theory, a lot of information that they are unable to use because of inefficiency, because of how siloed they are, because of how unstructured it is. So when we talk about AI, and especially looking at generative AI, what it's good at is classifying information. It's very good at processing data which is unstructured and being able to find patterns. It's very good at being able to put things into buckets that over time start to make more and more sense. And we are focusing on how we can harness that. So one of the things that we're doing is, of course, adding extra layer of insight based on just transactional data. So if you think about your payments, or you think about your bank statement, there is some information in there. And it can be easily translated to things like, we know what category it was, we know the merchant, we might be able to find the location and so on. But if you look at more transactions, then we might see patterns. We might find things like income. We might think about how stable that income is. We might think about your bills. You might think about commitments that are fixed. You might think about things that are fully like disposable and so on. So as you start looking at data across, we are still talking about single customer, but even when you within the single customer's data set, there's a lot that can be uncovered if you use technology to do that. And we use a lot of AI. We have a dedicated, very big, our own proprietary LLM model to look at that and try to find anything from categories to entities you've been dealing with and so on. And it's very, very good at that. But that's just the beginning. Now, the next thing that can happen, if you think of how this data can be used, is, okay, that's context of single customer, but I have multiple customers. I have millions of customers. Are there lessons to be learned? Can I actually use that data? Can I access it in a way that makes sense for my business objectives? That, I feel, and also what we hear from people we're talking to, it's actually far more challenging than it should be, because that data is distributed. The process I've described doesn't necessarily happen. So there is a lot of information which is just underutilized. So one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to get that customer view, the customer enriched information, those characteristics and insights we can build on top of transactions, but then have this for all customers and then made it accessible. And in our case, accessible means we would like to democratize access to this information across the whole financial institution. And in order to do that, we are employing generative AI chatbot, which is using one of the generic foundation models, but is surrounded with multimodal agents that are able to enable you to ask a business question, which might be, how do I sell more travel credit cards? Or how can I help my customers increase deposits? It can perform a bit of reasoning, but it can also translate this into what you know about your customers. And also it is able to find patterns that would correlate with the objective that you have in mind. And making it accessible through generative AI chatbot means that now anyone can do it. Because currently in a bank, if you're responsible for the travel card I've mentioned, what you have is you have an analyst, you task that person with finding more about your customers. That analyst has to submit a ticket to a data analyst team. They have to think of which database and what it means and how we are going to find this. They have to spend a bit of time on this. Probably they are not the ones to actually execute this. So the whole process easily might take weeks, while in our case, we want that guy that has the question to just open the tool, open the chatbot, ask the question, and get the answer instantly. And we want that answer then to be taken forward. So at the end of that workflow, I started talking about banks being just lots of workflows. So there is a workflow in which that idea ends with a marketing campaign. And currently, marketing campaigns, so marketing within financial institutions, it's a very, very complex area, but it is heavily focused on the digital channels interactions. It's heavily focused on where you click, what you look at, and so on.
Yeah.
And it's not looking at the financial side of things because that information is difficult to access, because that information is costly to access.
And you mean by that the sort of ROI aspect of investment around marketing?
ROI, yes. But
Yeah.
I mean, ROI when it comes to marketing, that's a whole topic on its own.
Yeah,
But even
true.
just trying to understand if things that you are doing, if they actually have genuine impact from the financial situation of the customer. And to go back to the example I used, so this person in the marketing department that now has to run a campaign to sell travel card. Now, what we want to happen, or what we aspire to happen, is for that person to have the full context of, why am I doing this? This person asked this question. Head of cards asked this question. This is how that was evolving in conversation with the tool that we provided. This is the segment that we're looking at. Those are people in this segment. This is how you've been communicating with them in the past. Those are their characteristics. Maybe there are some subset segments. Maybe there are people with families that have very different preferences and very different traveling patterns. So if you want to hit the right spot, you need to wait for a different point in time, and so on. And all that is in front of you. And also you can have continuous conversation around this, which means that it's no longer lots of mails and meetings. It's no longer you also waiting for the data department to tell you what is, let's say, the average income of the people that you'll be addressing this to, because then you want to adjust the copy accordingly and so on. All that is instantly available. So what we are really aspiring to do when it comes to AI is enable people to actually have valuable outcomes from the work they're putting in. Because it leads to much better end result if you just cut out the things that, from an engineer's point of view, everything here is trivial. You just write the query, you have to find the database and so on. But we have to appreciate the fact that financial institutions do not work like that, and they do not employ people to do this. They have very different objectives, which means that you want to remove all those things that can be seen as distractions, that are often omitted because they are difficult, they are costly, and just let people focus on what is really value-adding activity. And I use example that starts with owner of the product, ends with marketing, but the same applies to risk. The same applies to trying to understand your profitability, looking at reporting and so on. That access to data, making it very, very easy and contextual, is something that is yet ahead of us. And generative AI, just because it can translate what you have in mind into what's actually available in terms of the data feeds in terms of the models and so on, makes it possible. So right now, the best examples of how you accomplish something like that is when you hire a consultant. So CEO would often feel that, oh, yes, I have access to this information. I can get that level of information. But what's hidden is that beautiful presentation. It took like 2 or 3 weeks for like a single person going from, like data owner to data owner and collating this, and then you have this. And you could get the same in 5 minutes by just having a chat. That is fundamentally changing how you operate.
This is fascinating to me because you're right, and in so much of what you're saying, and it represents a really interesting pull in the industry as to what people are looking for in speed and efficiency. I spend a lot of time on this show talking to people about the trinity of friction reduction, speed and cost efficiency. So when you're talking about those sort of things and where AI can come into doing this, you've got this pull push factor of seeing all the benefits of what happens and where it can go and how it can massively improve all that sort of stuff. And when it comes to data, which is again a whole other subject on its own, data for me has been another buzzword of the last 5 years, plus in financial services. But it sort of misses the point, and this is something a drum I've been banging for years, that it doesn't do it in any of the it's not utilized in the same sort of way as it would be in retailers, for example, where I think there's enormous enormous efficiency in customer trends and how it puts the right offer to the right people at the right sort of stage, where production workflows sort of work through it. I think they're so far ahead of the financial services industry in its utilization of data, and particularly when it comes down to data analysis and actually turning insight into actionable actions that there afterwards. And this to me is an area there which can massively level the playing fields in terms of people getting this aspect right and utilizing products there that make it easy for people to utilize this sort of thing and take it further forward. The pullback obviously comes from people who've invested in large data teams over years, a whole school of data scientists, data analysts, and everyone in between sort of sat there and fearing generative AI. And we've heard all the headlines, right, about that, is Gen AI coming to take my job? And a company's thinking about this in financial services. Is it a data, a big data team or Gen AI, or is it a merger of the two and a sort of reconstitution of people in that sort of space to be able to do more, and then having different schools of people saying, right, let's take this analysis and insight and utilize it in a much better way to have better results for the business, which can improve productivity as the other piece, as opposed to just saying there's only so much efficiency you can have in cost reduction, right? Before you need to make sure that you're doing the other side of it and increasing production at the same time.
So absolutely. So the future is, it is inevitable that people will be worried about getting their job taken away by AI, especially when we are talking about someone who is in the business of writing reasonably simple database queries and generating reports, which are like it's the same thing every day. But that would have been at risk regardless. So it's not necessarily only a question of AI, it's just a question of organizations getting better in using the technology that they have at their disposal. Our view, and this is also the conversations that we're having right now with people like heads of data or people responsible for providing access to the information within the organization, is more around being able to free up space to do things that are going to be more valuable or actually are going to make a difference. So the focus right now seems to be more about getting rid of things that very often are seen as annoyance, getting rid of things that are ad hoc queries from the business, which often are unclear, and you have to spend a lot of time getting to the bottom of what people are trying to get to, and basically being able to have that as a little more self-service capability. Because one of the big values that we see here with how we are approaching things is you don't need to know how to write a query, or you don't need to know specifically where the data sits, or you don't need to know what are the data feeds. That's going to be explained to you, which is something which is the very often the most disliked part of the job for a data analyst, to have to go through those conversations and try to kind of dig into this, instead of doing some deeper research or trying to focus on things that are going to have potentially higher value in terms of the outcome. So it's absolutely not a conversation about replacing anyone. It's a conversation about
making people better, right?
Making people better, letting people do what they are good at, and taking away points that are just reputable and frankly speaking are all about communicating with different stakeholders and trying to get on the same page more than actually doing the work. That's the data team's point of view. And conversely, on the business side, it's also not about removing anyone, but about being able to do your job better. So being able to access to the information, being able to interrogate it yourself, being able to explore, being able to potentially get inspired, but it's all about leading to better outcomes faster rather than replacing functions within the organization.
I think this is so important. When you read the papers and look at reports, etc., we are in the midst of a global productivity crisis that people talk about, and across all of the Western countries, you are seeing more and more derogatory press around productivity going down, and performance per head effectively across the whole of the country becoming less and less on the output side of things, whilst technology has been evolving at pace to allow that to be improved. And I think that the missing ingredient is that utilization of tech, as you're talking about it. We've had all this sort of innovation around it, but it's people then utilizing it. And I think when there is a focus on two aspects, cost reduction and efficiency on one side, and then productivity gains on the other, I'm convinced. I've run a business for 14 years. There is only so much cost reduction that I can do in challenging times on a business at a certain stage. So cost will always be at a certain level. Where my gains come is if I can take people and move them forward by 10, 20% per head. And that's seismically different than saving a couple of pounds here and there at the same sort of stage. So if you've got technology that can focus on efficiency, and this is, I'm taking my business and moving it into a much more complicated world of financial services alongside that. But I think the concept remains exactly the same, that if you can, spend your time obviously being efficient and making sure that you're running a well-managed and documented business. But if you can look at every single person in your organization and utilize those tools and utilize Gen AI to make them better, faster, stronger, and put those percentage points onto an increase in productivity, that's where I genuinely believe that growth can happen, both on a world GDP basis, but on a more micro basis in the performance of financial institutions who are looking at this. And I find it absolutely fascinating.
And we already have seen that. So not using generative AI, but one of the great things that we do is being able to help people that are sort of underbanked get access to financing, which is possible only if you try to find an unconventional way. Now, before we started doing that, usually, like if you had thin file, as in like what credit bureaus would consider the person that they don't have enough information. So you either have no credit history, or you are new to the country, or perhaps you just graduated and you've never been using financial products to your name. So there's very little trail to you. That was a gap that existed in the market. And to deal with that, now we have technology that helps with this. Like, it didn't take anyone's job. It made, as a whole, it made the economy working better, because we enabled efficient access to financing for people that were unable to get that. At the same time, it's done in a way that allows the financial institutions to manage risk. But the underlying technology, it's actually using AI. It is using ability to process data at scale, being able to find patterns and so on. So that's an example where productivity and the overall outcomes are positive for everyone. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's just enabling things that were not possible in the past. So and AI is going to accelerate that.
And yeah, I 100% agree with it. And I think it's I think it creates this sort of enormous potential, enormous opportunity, and it's great to see businesses like yours and what you're doing clearly passionately at the start of it, with people thinking about it and looking at it in a different way. And I want to sort of move on to that with regards to your role in this, because as you mentioned and alluded to a couple of times, you're looking at this and thinking about the use cases and thinking about how this can sort of come through from a customer perspective, and how can what can this actually look like from a day-to-day basis, for the customers who you're serving. And you've given examples there straight away, but you're talking about a really interesting part of product management that's sort of, I guess, almost very different in that B2B world than it is in the sort of B2C. You mentioned there at the very outset about where you sort of sit and how that sort of works through. And we were talking off camera beforehand about the whole concept of most of the reading, most of the research, most of the books and thought leadership around the subject of product management sort of fits in that B2C world. And when you're looking at things there in a proposal of a B2B company in financial services, which is talking about enterprise clients, where you've got complex regulation around a lot of what they're doing and complexity around how they sit there. You're not talking about massive scale and selling to hundreds of thousands of people. And in many cases, you're talking to tens of people at various different phases. It becomes a very unique sort of challenge to it. So coming into the sort of my favorite role of discussing the sort of the life of a product manager, tell me a little bit about your exposure, experience, and thoughts on that sort of the difference of B2B and B2C, and where you think the sort of real skill set lies within that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this is a topic which I find fascinating, because in my experience, very often when you join a business that you didn't have previous experience with its nature, as in like when you join a B2B business, especially
Yeah.
working with enterprise clients, and you have a very good background in product management, but that is very much focused on B2C, very much focused on best practices around this, you're into a major surprise. And there are things that are very specific to this role that occasionally feel almost not that they feel like going a bit against what would be the B2C best practice. So the most important thing that you have to do is you have to understand what the company is doing in terms of the product and the market fit and how it translates to what you need to do, because that alone can answer many questions that you have. And just to give like extreme example, there's a model in which you set up a company, you build it, you get the client ends up acquiring it. Like your exit strategy is that first big client where you just have a great fit and you essentially end up selling to them. And it's a valid business model. There are lots of people that specialize in doing this, that they've been kind of manufacturing those businesses almost like in a factory line and then selling them to the big tech companies or the enterprise financial institutions and so on. And that means that single client is who you are working with, and you are managing a product, but you are doing this in a very joint, very collaborative manner, which means that the stakeholder management aspect of this is by far the most important thing to be able to map out and understand and translate it into how you work. Now, and when it comes to how you work, the most important aspect of product management in a company like this is prioritization. But the prioritization here is not something which is straight off based on metrics that you're getting for marketing or product usage or feedback from customers at scale. You don't very often you don't have that. Very often, especially when working with financial institutions, you don't really know much about how the product it's used, because even that is often considered sensitive to the business. So you have limited points. But then you have stakeholders instead of that. And those stakeholders are both the clients and people that you're engaging there, but also your internal stakeholders, especially the commercial team. So people that are face to face with the client, they understand their pain points, they understand what they're trying to achieve, and being able to collaborate and being able to find the fit, and also occasionally being able to compromise on the vision, because it
Mm.
might mean that there are some things that you might want to do as a custom just to satisfy a specific client, but it might make sense for the product. It for sure might make sense for the company from the commercial perspective. Now, being able to wrap your head around this is essential, and you will not have hard metrics to run this. It's very tempting to put everything in a spreadsheet and say, this is what people have voted for, or this is what we think this is going to mean in terms of adoption. It's difficult to do that. It's
Mm.
also difficult to find any other way of pseudoscientific prioritization. The thing that I have found works best, annoyingly, is to just try to look at ROI, look at what we think the commercial outcome from this feature is going to be, versus look at how much we're going to spend building it. But it's imperfect, because especially in an organization that is relatively young and small, and you only have a couple of dozens of clients, the price you're talking about, it's not something that you can easily figure out. It's always subject to negotiation. It's always subject to some custom approach, and it makes it difficult. And then we are also looking at business that might be closing few deals per quarter. Now, so even the pipeline itself
Mm.
might be limiting your ability to look at ROI. So then you fall back to stakeholder management. You need to work on consensus within the organization. You need to work closely with the client in order to be able to understand what they need, in order to be able also to push back and be able to make them the right choices, because they are also, as much as they're looking at you as a vendor, they're also looking at you as a partner. And also, maybe going back to the beginning, one of the reasons why I think at Meniga we have been fairly successful selling to enterprise clients was we have been able to position ourselves as people that are just nice to work with, people
Mm.
that understand their business, understand their challenges, and we are able to help. And we are not, we are not trying to ring fence the scope and have scope of work signed off and stamped and then filed as a holy document forever. We understand that it's a journey for them. It's
Mm.
actually far more difficult for them, because very often that's the thing that they're doing once and then they move to something else. So we have the expertise on the product that we have, but also how to use it, and we should be able to accommodate for what makes sense. So you really have to balance a lot more in terms of different voices and different opinions and different pushbacks, as compared to what is happening in the B2C world, which means that you have far less time to focus on things um, around customer research. You have far less time to focus on other ways you'd get information on whether what you're doing makes sense and whether it
Mm.
fits. And instead of that, you have to listen to those voices and you have to engage with those people. So this is, and to make it even more complicated, the bigger the organization you are working with, the more likely it is that there are multiple political camps within that organization, which is also something that you have to navigate. Luckily, any good B2B company would have commercial team that is able to navigate that. But again,
Mm.
that also makes them a very important partner for you. It makes them that group that is whispering to your ear, okay, it's great we have this workshop, but that group, like what they are pushing for, is not going to get funding, or it's not going to get happen. So it might be dead end. It's just a lot of that. And once you realize this, once you figure out how this can be translated to how you prioritize things, then you can start thinking of product management best practice and how you can take pieces, because it's like 99% of it is still applicable. It's just the context is different. So all the templates for workshops or all the different methods for approaching things like estimations, they apply. It's just the data you're working with is a bit different, because it's coming from different sources, from different stakeholders, and you have to be aware of that. So, but to make that jump, occasionally it's difficult,
Mm.
and it's something that we see doesn't always work. And actually, to be honest, I don't have a magical formula that says, oh, I'm looking at the product manager and I know that they're going to fit into what we have in mind. So, for example, I don't know if that person is going to fit that bot because it's a combination of skills.
It's really interesting you say all of that, and my head's whirring as you're talking through it, because I'm sort of thinking again about the sort of products that gain traction and don't gain traction based on the users. And when you're talking there about, the complexity of not being able to get the feedback for obvious reasons about how people are utilizing it, and the importance of the stakeholders within that, it's a twofold play, right? I think the businesses, the software businesses in particular, that are successful are the ones there that really focus on the success post implementation as well as just selling the product. Because it's one thing to have a product in place and say, look, it can revolutionize your business and do this, and that, and the other. But it's the winning the hearts and the minds of the people who are utilizing it on a day-to-day basis, and having that stakeholder inside who can then be the sponsor to really drive the adoption of that. Because so many of them, I think, fail because of that lack of real adoption afterwards, and having the champions internally, and then having the right people doing it. And I'm convinced that probably the usability of 20% of businesses, sorry, of products that businesses buy, technology products that businesses buy within financial services, I reckon probably play to about 20% of capacity at max at various different phases. And the businesses that really thrive, and I'm pretty convinced that you will be sat there in this sort of category, have got product teams there who are listening and working with that team to make it successful post implementation and post sale. And again, as you say, that's a product that I think both of us probably share a bit of a passion about, but it's a massive unlocked opportunity within it as well. Look, I said at the start that before we came on air that I'd be really disciplined about the timings of this, and I've been horrible at keeping to that because the conversation's been fascinating, which is always a good sign. And I could be talking for a lot longer about this, but I'll be aware of your time and our viewers at the same sort of stage as well. So let me finish just by throwing something at you, which says, look, tell us and get us excited about what we can expect to see from Bud, yourself, over the course of the next 12 months. This will be coming through sort of at start of Q2 of 2024. There's a lot of year left in front of us. What's exciting to hear from Bud, and then after that, tell me who should be reaching out to you. What's the best way of doing that, and go from there.
So we are at the point in time where we are onboarding our initial clients on the new product I've been talking about, which we call Drive, which is all about taking the data across all customers within the organization, within the financial institution, and making that data really accessible. So I think that from 12 months from now, I would like to, with confidence, be able to say, we know that this really works, and those are the results you can get from it, and this is how it is genuinely changing the outcomes, both for the financial institution, but also for the end customers getting better service. Now, 12 months might seem like a lot, but we are engaging with really big financial institutions. So to be able to do that in 12 months from now is actually what's going to be pretty amazing in terms of time to market, ability to see it work, and also get feedback from those organizations. But at the same time, we are also focusing quite a lot on the US market. So we are a very well established player in the UK, but US is right now the place where we are focusing most of our efforts. And it would be amazing to have what I just said coming from a US client. So that's I'm fairly confident that's going to happen. And this is something that's
such a big opportunity out there, isn't it?
So the US market is especially exciting for us right now because of the open banking regulation, which is coming, which is it's acting as a catalyst. It is making people think about what they are doing, what is their position in the market, what they are exposed to, and also thinking about the competition a bit more than they have been previously, because now your competitors will be able to access to data from your accounts, which means that there are lots of risks, but also opportunities, which we have first-hand experience from the UK and European market, and we can apply this because we have been intentionally building models and the underlying technology stack in a way that it out of the box support the specific aspects of the US market. So there's lots of promises there.
Fantastic. And the best way for people to get in touch with you to find out, look, this is a conversation that we could be running for hours more. There's even things there like when you talked about the concept of how you know to get right the product management. I'd love to take that on a different conversation with you, because it's a big part of our business, and something which we're talking to. So I feel like there's about 5 different shows that we can follow up with this, and I'd love to do that and have you back on the show as well. But if people want to take this off air and get in touch with you, what's the best way to find out more about you and Bud?
The contact information is on our website, which is thisisbud.com. But for everyone that can find me on LinkedIn, it's Jakub Piotrowski, but VP of Product. Just feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation around any of the topics we just mentioned. And I'm really keen on getting feedback from any possible direction, because, as I've already mentioned, getting feedback, getting the voice of people that potentially would be using things that we're building is really crucial to what we do, but also difficult to get.
Yeah,
So
true.
anytime I can get my hands on this, I'm more than happy to follow on that opportunity.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved this. Really enjoyable episode, and a great way to move into lunch now. Halfway through a day. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks for getting off the. I know you've been ill as well, so to get off your sick bed and perform the way you have is great. We haven't even got into the whole concept of talking about the helicopters behind your head as well. So this is why we have to follow it up with another episode, I'm sure in the not too distant future as well. But listen, it's been lovely having you on the show. Well done. Get better soon, and thanks for coming and joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and I enjoyed the conversation immensely. Thank you very much.
Good man. And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on the next episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.